Welcome everyone again to another episode of the ideaXme show that profiles the humans behind the really big ideas that are shaping our world, inspiring the future and future creators, and for all those that like really great stories. I'm Ira Pastor, your life science ambassador along for the journey today. So, as listeners of the show know, for the last several episodes, we've spent a lot of time talking about the themes of health, wellness, healthy aging, and we've been speaking to a broad range of experts, primarily in the fields of both therapeutic and preventative interventions, as it pertains to the chronic degenerative diseases primarily found in the developed world. And I always find it interesting when I go to a conference nowadays focused on longevity or wellness or health span or what have you. Somebody always gives a presentation highlighting how improvements in sanitation ultimately and technically did much more, if not, for more humanity and human lifespan, in essence doubling it, than modern medicine has done over the last century. And that is why, I love numbers. It's amazing to me that in the year 2020, it's currently estimated that close to 2.5 billion people on this planet still lack access to the basic tools of improved sanitation, namely toilets and or latrines. It's about 35% of the world's population. A billion, amazingly, still defecate in the open, and at least 10% of the world's population is thought to consume food irrigated by raw wastewater. It is estimated that over 800,000 children per year perish from diseases like diarrhea, cholera, dysentery, typhoid, and polio. Amazing stuff. The Toilet Board Coalition is a business-led partnership and platform, which ultimately has the ambition to address this global sanitation crisis by accelerating the so-called Sanitation Economy, which envisions a new marketplace for innovation, entrepreneurship, investment to ultimately transform sanitation systems from this unaffordable public cost to this untapped business opportunity, ultimately delivering significant impact to both businesses and society. Their organization enables private sector engagement. They connect large and small companies. They ensure collaboration between private, public, and nonprofit sectors, all with this goal, a common goal, to achieve United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 6, universal access to sanitation. And their organization has a rather impressive roster of partners, consumer packaged good giants, Unilever and Kimberly-Clark, Firmenich, one of the largest fragrance companies, Veolia, the French water management company, World Bank, UNICEF, amazing list. The Toilet Bowl Coalition also runs the Toilet Accelerator, which is the world's first accelerator program dedicated to sanitation entrepreneurs. I'm pleased today to be joined by Cheryl Hicks. Cheryl is the Toilet Board Coalition's Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director, who is an experienced business investment and sustainable development professional. She has over 20 years of experience in developing a variety of innovative approaches to responsible business strategies, impact investment strategies, high-performing multi-stakeholder collaborations. Before joining the Toilet Board Coalition, Cheryl was the Sustainability Investment Partner and Head of Impact Investing at Quadia Impact Finance in Geneva. Throughout her career, Cheryl's had several positions with sustainable development platforms, worked with Fortune 500 companies, investors, startups across numerous sectors, including healthcare, consumer goods, food, forestry, chemistry, and renewable energy. Cheryl began her career in corporate sustainability at the World's Business Council for Sustainable Development in Geneva, Switzerland. A lot to go through here. Exciting to talk to you. Cheryl, thanks for taking the time to come on the show.
Great, thanks so much, Ira, and it's really exciting to be here to be talking about the sanitation economy, in this critical time in our current history where the decisions we make now will really shape and have lasting impact on our common future, and really we see the COVID-19 global health crisis as really a crisis on sanitation and hygiene. So really pleased to talk to you today about the sanitation economy and what we are advocating, which is business solutions for sanitation and hygiene that can be a critical part of the response now, but can also be scaled up for long-term sustainability and resilience as we move into the post-crisis scenario. So thank you again.
No, it's definitely our pleasure. The typically we start off the show by giving our guests the floor for a little while, just to talk about themselves, so the audience can learn about you. If you could take a few minutes just to go into sort of who you are, where you grew up, sort of your background throughout the sustainable investment community, and ultimately, what brought you to the epicenter of this sanitation crisis in your career. That'd be a great intro story.
Sure. The who am I and where did I come from? So I grew up. I'm Canadian. I grew up north of Toronto in a small village, and moved here to Switzerland in the early 2000s. So I've been here for quite a while as well, and still based here. But in terms of my upbringing in Canada, and where I am now. I think growing up in a small town, you were always keen to get out and travel and see new things. And I think really traveling, and I had the good fortune to travel with my family on holidays and see really the inequity in the world, which has shaped a lot of my thinking and my passion for what I'm doing now. And really the fact that where we are born and what kind of context we're born into really determines the advantages or disadvantages that we have. And that has always been something that I've been interested in finding ways to close the gap and also learn from other cultures and contexts. But moving into sustainability, I think many people will say that there's sort of a speech or a book or something that inspired an experience. And for me, it was in the early 90s in Canada. Stephen Lewis, a Canadian politician and envoy to the United Nations Children's Fund, the UNICEF at the time, Naomi Klein, the movie The Corporation, all of these people coming together were essentially questioning the branded world that we had all grew up in North America in the 70s, and that there was a sense of responsibility that these large corporations needed to have for the societies that they were impacting. And that notion of equity, together with this notion of where businesses could really turn some of that power into positive impact on society, really interested me. And that was really the birth of corporate sustainability in the 90s. I was happy to leave my corporate job at the time and move to a hospital foundation to really lead a program on corporate responsibility in the area of environmental health, which is very relevant with what's happening today with the current health crisis. And so that, in that experience, we were really looking at how to get information flowing, between the medical community in that case and experts to CEOs. There was a lack of awareness of some of the environmental impact or health impacts that their products and approaches were having. And you hear this too, when I moved formally into corporate sustainability, people like Ray Anderson, the former CEO of Interface, Jochen Zeitz, the former CEO of Puma, will all talk about how they were running their companies not realizing the environmental or social impact that they were having, and when they found out, took steps to radically change the way they were doing business. And these were some of the early pioneers in corporate sustainability, and that really influenced me. And so the work that we were doing at the hospital was really about that, which was focused on environmental health, but really helping CEOs to just become aware of those impacts and therefore be able to make different decisions accordingly. And at the time of that project, I was invited to work with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development here in Switzerland, who were the leaders at the time working with CEOs on these issues. And they were starting to not only look at how to mitigate risks, but they were also starting to look at how to leverage their corporate power to have more positive impact, to create more innovation that would enable us to to have more sustainable development in effect. And that was really led by Paul Pullman, who we all know is the former CEO of Unilever.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, he and a number of CEOs were leading a piece of work to start to transition the agenda from risk to opportunity, and really start to foster the innovations that would address sustainability issues versus trying to do less bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really influenced by that. That was sort of the mid 2000s, and became really interested also in innovation and entrepreneurship, and really the new thinking coming out of these places, which started with very different contexts and were solving problems in very new ways. And so after 6 years with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, working with large corporations and CEOs, but in this time when innovation and the opportunity side of sustainable development and corporate sustainability started to emerge, I moved to really focus on working with those entrepreneurs and helping them to connect to the resources and expertise that large companies had been developing to develop new solutions in the places that really needed those
Mm-hmm.
new solutions. And that's really what brought me to sanitation and the Toilet Board Coalition, working with a number of companies sort of around the time of the Millennium Development Goals, and in 2015, when the conclusion of the Millennium Development Goals showed that sanitation had made the least progress of any of the goals in that 15-year period. Everybody started to wake up, or certainly those companies whose businesses and their future growth depended on people having access to sanitation. And so at that time, a number of companies, and you listed them in your introduction, came together and said, look, we believe that we can develop new solutions for
Mm-hmm.
sanitation. This has been a development issue that has largely been left to governments, and there must be more that we can do as business and play more of a role. So they set up the Toilet Board Coalition in 2015 to really look for innovations and new business models that would deliver sanitation through the market, that would provide
Mm-hmm.
access to sanitation to that 2.5 billion that you mentioned do not have access to. And in fact, it's 4.5 billion
Okay.
that don't have access to safely managed sanitation. So you're right on the access, absolutely. But there's an additional group of people that don't have access to safely managed sanitation, which means that they may have a toilet, they may have sanitation to do their business, but there is no one managing that waste, or there's no treatment of that waste. So also causing issues in terms of pollution in the environment. And so when we came together in 2015, the idea was to support businesses, to help them grow, and also to potentially co-innovate, where needed.
Mm-hmm.
And so we set up an accelerator program, the Toilet Accelerator, which is now called the Sanitation Economy Accelerator program, to really create a pipeline and seek out those businesses that were already operating, and to support them. And so that program has been running for 5 years now. We've supported almost 30 companies in that program, and it continues to grow, which we're very excited about. And in addition to that, we started to look at the other areas where business could play a role besides, supporting smaller businesses with their models and growth. But we started to look at areas where large businesses were learning there was new value. Because one of the things that we first saw when we started looking at sanitation systems from a business lens was a lot of cost. And a lot of cost that the global development community seemed to accept that it would always be a cost, and global governments would have to pay for people to have access to sanitation. And when we looked into the system, of course, this is now, approaching 2020, but 2017, and companies have robust circular economy strategies. Waste to resource is the mantra of business. Many businesses are digitizing, and sanitation had really been left behind in all of these areas. So
Yeah.
when we started to see some interesting innovations on the toilet access side, we were really keen to look for where there was value, more value in the system to justify bigger investments,
Mm-hmm.
to drive these new models. And where we found that value was really in the waste. No one had been looking into sanitation waste.
Right.
Wastewater somewhat, but not sewage.
Right.
And and so we started to look at that, and found we ran a specific accelerator cohort in 2017 to get to know some of these models and businesses that were developing new technologies to convert sewage into biogas, renewable energy, fuel,
Mm-hmm.
organic fertilizers, protein products, and now we're finding much more. And found that these models were starting to become really interesting as large businesses and society become more resource constrained. Mining sewage systems
Sure.
becomes quite an interesting idea. And so a lot of support for those models. They're really growing. They're innovating. They're finding new ways to really utilize the waste and turn it into real value.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very exciting area, the circular sanitation economy. And then on the other side, again, another area of new value in digitization. My story about digitization is something I call a sector crush. You have a crush on somebody in high school, but I'm very interested in what others are doing and how others are being successful. And so when we started to think about new technologies, we asked ourselves, who's doing this well? Who has been able to get access to an essential service to the most vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
quickly using digital? And our answer was pay-as-you-go solar. So M-Kopa in Kenya, we were very taken by a big crush on M-Kopa because they had been able to get access to solar energy, renewable energy, to 1 million people in something like 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
This is the kind of speed to access to sanitation that we were looking for. So we started to look into these models of digitization, and we saw that there was both a need for digitization in the operations of these services, just to make it much more efficient,
Mm-hmm.
but also that we should be leveraging digital tools in new ways in order to optimize those opportunities. And so now we also have pay-as-you-go sanitation
Mm-hmm.
businesses. There's Ghana called Clean Team, which is the first business to provide sanitation $1 a day, just as we did with solar, and people can pay off their sanitation system, which is a container-based sanitation system in this case. But we also knew there was more, because
Mm-hmm.
large businesses and many industries are talking about data as the gold of the 21st century. And so we started to look into what data was in sanitation systems
Mm-hmm.
that would be valuable. And we happened upon some researchers at the Broad Institute, the MIT Harvard
Sure.
collaboration in Boston, that had been doing some work on new technologies to trace infectious disease from toilets.
Mm-hmm.
And they started doing this because again, it's around 2016, 2017, and Ebola was one of the biggest health crises before our current one.
Mm-hmm.
And they found that they needed to find a way to trace the circulation of disease before it became a pandemic, an epidemic or a pandemic.
Sure.
And they found that with Ebola and many infectious diseases, you can see it circulating in public toilets, for
Mm-hmm.
example, or
Mm-hmm.
in your own personal toilet eventually, but in this case, in terms of public health in public toilets. And they started to develop those technologies, which we started to get very excited about, the kind of impact to leverage sanitation systems to also be an early warning system for disease and pandemics. By the way, these technologies are now being deployed for COVID.
Mm-hmm.
There's an organization in the US that has these technologies in 100 cities at the moment and is scaling up. But and they're finding that they can trace COVID before it's symptomatic, So before it's showing up in tests, they can see it circulating in the sewage systems and be able to then look at how many individuals will become positive in a certain catchment area. So this is very exciting. This is all value from our sanitation
Sure.
systems, the place where we hadn't been looking.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a, I encourage people that are listening and watching to go to the Toilet Board website, and then, you outline this fascinating, I'll call ecosystem of possibilities that connect, the circular economy, the smart sanitation economy, and so forth. I want to just dive into a couple of these in a little more detail, if we could.
Sure.
I mean, one of the speaking, that's starting, say, with the smart sanitation. I heard just a few weeks ago on a show where somebody was talking about, they referenced our toilets as, this wonderful laboratory. They say home-based smart laboratory. What you all have here in the developed world. We don't really think of it too much. I mean, you've obviously spoken about things like Ebola and infectious disease tracing, but there's others, there's a lot of things. I mean, I'm not the expert in this, that, using the sort of the state of the art in terms of analysis and diagnostics and so forth, that toilet bowl can tell us about our everyday health and monitor our everyday health.
Yeah.
Are you, and obviously nothing confidential here, because I know you see different business plans and so forth. Are you seeing anything coming through the incubator on sort of the chronic disease front about, obviously we can monitor, colon cancer and, maybe get a heads up on heart disease, other sort of metabolic disorders, anything interesting on that particular front that's come across your desk?
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing a lot of development here in terms of new technologies. So our coalition, as you mentioned at the beginning in our Accelerator program, we focus on the business model. So we're interested in technologies, but we really work with them when they become a business model or move kind of out of the innovation lab. We do host some innovation labs for some of these early stage innovations, which is what we've been doing with some of these digital technologies. We've just had a 2-year innovation lab in the city of Pune in India to test anything that was available that people were willing to bring to Pune to really understand the technologies, but also understand the use cases for the ecosystem that needs to be built to enable different business models. And so in terms of chronic disease, I mean, absolutely. I mean, from what we've understood, depending on the technology, it's really a matter of configuring the sensors or robots, if you will, depending on whether you're looking at systems or the toilet itself, to track whatever you want. It's just a matter of configuration, and some of it costs depending on how sophisticated those technologies are. Then there's the analytics and the transmission of the data. So there's also, in terms of public health, where the priorities of the places that want to trace. I'm just looking at a document from our partners at MIT, who we've been working with on many of these technologies and business models, and they have a list here which says we can in sewage and toilets, we can trace infectious disease like obviously COVID, Zika, but also hepatitis C and other antibiotic resistant bacteria. We get our diet and nutrition, of course, and then there's sort of the other side of pharmaceuticals, other environmental contaminants, nicotine, alcohol, etc. So if you think about how we talk about it is, if you think about the test that your doctor can do, what's going into our toilets is the matter that we're testing to find out those things. So I'm not going to say our toilets can do that, reliably now, because that's not the case, but that is in the realm of possibility that we could look to for the future. And if I can bring this back to equity, I mean, all of this, exciting stuff of, robots and sewer systems and sensors in toilets and, sanitation health centers for women in vulnerable places is really all about driving enough value out
Mhm.
of sanitation systems to justify the investments in making sure everybody has access to it and making sure that it is safely managed for
Mhm.
everyone. So that is why, all of this is important really at the end of the day, because we still don't have access for
Sure.
everybody. And the world is very worried about the most vulnerable populations that we know of have not been hit by this pandemic yet. But if they were to, they wouldn't have access to the same protection that we do.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, excellent point. Really excellent point. Um, thinking about what you're talking about in terms of the situation we're now with COVID is very interesting.
Mm.
I did a show just recently with somebody that specializes in sort of the ecosystems over there and talking about things like when you get rid of a certain we- predator or whatever, some animal that would normally defecate in the rainforest, and the worms don't do their thing anymore, and then certain bugs don't do their thing, and so the bats have nothing to eat, so they fly away, and so forth. It's as you were as you see on your site, you talk about this
Mm.
biocycle concept, and we
Right.
think of it in
Right.
terms of waste, nutrients, water. Then downstream, these higher value added fertilizers, strange forms, interesting, I say strange forms of protein that
Yeah.
may be used to feed billions of people one day.
Right.
We normally think, as you mentioned on the site, this linear thing. We take this
Mm.
waste and it goes over here and that's it. But once again, the cycling. Any very interesting sort of protein, food-related fertilizer stories that are exciting to you that you see coming in terms of how we can, speaking of equity, how we can leverage
Sure.
into feeding
Sure. I mean,
populations?
sure. So, the circular economy in sanitation is very exciting. So what we advocate for is a biological waste system.
Okay.
And the circular economy and the work that a lot of companies and cities are doing on circular economy started with sort of the technical side,
Mm-hmm.
the metals, the heavy stuff that we could also upcycle and create new lives for. And the biocycle hadn't really been, or the biological cycle hadn't really been looked at except for food waste. It was starting to be looked at in terms of managing food waste and what we could do with food waste, which is where some of the early protein, converting food waste into protein technologies came from. Um, and so when you start to look at the full biological cycle, that
Mm-hmm.
is food waste, it's farm waste, it's agricultural waste, it's anything that's biodegradable in terms of packaging, in terms of feminine hygiene
Mm-hmm.
um, products, in terms of cleaners themselves. If you can put anything biological into the toilet, it becomes this conduit for a huge biological resource stream. And in emerging markets in developing countries, they are rich in biological waste. They haven't seen the same development of the sort of the manufacturing waste that we see in our markets, and so they really stand to gain
Mm-hmm.
from leveraging this new input material that we
Sure.
can turn into lots of things. So we are very excited about this. There's organic fertilizers that fertilizer companies are telling us are much higher value than they've seen because of the additional nutrients coming through the human waste,
Mm-hmm.
which we call toilet resources, by the way, not acknowledging that
Toilet
it's waste, but that
resources, I
it's a
like that.
resource. Um, and proteins, which you mentioned, there are technologies that can turn biological material, including toilet resources, into high value proteins, and also high value chemicals. There are very interesting models for energy production, whether it be biogas or fuel. And really, because we're just scratching the surface of understanding these biological waste systems and what happens when we combine different elements, we really see this as just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we can do with this material. So we really imagine a world where we are capturing and upcycling 100% of the world's toilet resources. If
Mm-hmm.
we were to do that, that's 3.8 trillion liters based on today's population, a
Wow.
biological resource that can be upcycled into other renewable resources. For industry, for society, it's pretty amazing. But we need the toilet infrastructure in place, the right type of toilets. The toilet choice matters in order to be able to activate that biological waste system. So this is something that we are advocating strongly at the Toilet Board Coalition, and putting the necessary safety and standards for product safety and consumer health, of course, at the center of that work. But I want to mention something else about the circular economy.
Sure.
In sanitation, and what we get in terms of this rich set of resources is also, if you think of companies, that are fully leveraging the circular economy in many parts of their business, but not yet toilets and not yet sanitation. And what we believe that we'll start to see with COVID, is really more of an awareness of the importance of sanitation and hygiene, and more of an awareness, that sanitation and hygiene has to become the top of corporate sustainability agendas, just as it is currently the top of the public agenda. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, business, and it is happening, and when that happens, businesses are going to need to understand how to fully provide the right access to sanitation and hygiene for their employees in the communities where their employees live. And to do that, they're going to start looking for ways to optimize value, and that's where the circular economy is a solution that is ready to be scaled up for businesses, for cities, for communities. So that is something that we really see as a driver, of demand. And as we look to solutions for COVID, we are really advocating that we look to solutions that can be long-term, sustainable, and resilient. Mm-hmm. And these models, these circular models, really help us to provide sanitation and hygiene. Yep. And be able to upcycle and fully reuse that waste. And when we're reusing the waste, it's not showing up again as pollution in society, which is happening, of course, in a lot of informal settlements that we see today, and spreading even more disease. So a critical sort of public health and industrial health and safety issue mm-hmm. that we believe will start to become front and center.
Outstanding. One thing, I'd love to tap your brain on this one. Occasionally on this show, we talk to folks that are in, I would say embryonic, but, sort of early stage industries. I've been doing a series of shows on, for instance, the pharmaceutical development of psychedelic drugs, which, were off limits for decades, but now there's a nascent industry growing around this area for therapeutic purposes. I talk a lot with companies in the area of aging and longevity biotechnologies. The sanitation economy, I mean, I went through this list earlier. I mentioned, giants like Unilever, Kimberly-Clark, Veolia, the World Bank, UNICEF. You've really put together an amazing basket of leaders in various aspects of this space, private sector, public sector. How did you do that? in this, I mean, any tips, any surprises? Were there companies that you went to and they said no? Nothing confidential, of course, but any interesting learnings from this process of bringing all these stakeholders together?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The Toilet Board Coalition itself is a really interesting innovation. So in our case, and I've seen this, I've also been part of the formulation of other coalitions as well, and really the most successful ones in the Toilet Board Coalition is this way as well, is really peer-to-peer ask. Okay. So the coalition is built by peers coming together really around a common goal, a common objective. And so the original businesses, Unilever, Kimberly-Clark, and Fermentation and Lixil Corporation, the Japanese sanitary ware maker, originally came together because they had a common view at the time that they had to they had to look at new solutions for sanitation that was really going to start to close the gap in terms of progress. And so they asked, each other to work on this together. They saw that each other were working on different pieces of it, and so they decided to do it together because it's a huge problem, obviously, to tackle, and they needed many. They weren't going to do it alone, and needed many companies at the table. And then when we started to sort of expand the vision into the circular economy and digital, that's when Veolia came on board, and really those companies went to two companies in waste management to say, look, we need your expertise at the table. And this is sort of where we see the potential opportunity. But this is a coalition where they do the work. These businesses are really have their sleeves rolled up and their hands dirty, really developing the solutions alongside small companies. And so they seek each other out based on expertise we need around the table in order to solve these problems. The development, the global development partners like World Bank and UNICEF, WaterAid, et cetera, are the incumbents of the understanding of current systems. And so it was very important, that the coalition be business-led in order to bring new thinking to the table and really focus on business solutions, but really important to have really the experts around the table in sanitation and global sanitation, especially in some of the most difficult contexts. And they've been really important in terms of being that sounding board when a solution comes up, perhaps that has been tried before, and where the issues were, so that we're not reinventing the wheel. Also, donor governments have been really helpful in providing blended finance mechanisms to really help these business models get off the ground. So, in my view, it's critical that if you're going to be a business-led organization and focus on business solutions to development or environmental issues, then you have to have business in the lead, and you have to have them bringing their expertise to the table and expanding the group when new expertise is needed. But you also need those that really understand the current systems, but are willing to look at where systems change is needed and can happen, and where this new expertise around the table can help to enable that. So that's been our experience at the Toilet Board, and it's been a really positive one. I think what's interesting also, the other, I've seen many coalitions with that kind of configuration, big business, development agencies, development sector experts, but bringing the entrepreneurs, bringing the innovators to the table in that scenario, in my experience, it was new with the Toilet Board. And that is really what, to be honest, is the glue that keeps it all together, because we need constant innovation. We need to constantly be innovating. And this program both attracts talent, it attracts companies, it attracts investors that are really interested in new ways of doing things. So also really encourage large companies to partner and innovate with these guys that are really doing quite extraordinary things in difficult contexts on the ground.
Excellent points. Cheryl, before I get to a wrap-up question, I just wanted to, there's one other thing I want to throw in here. Occasionally on this show, I give my kids the bio of the person that I'm going to be interviewing, and I have a question for my 13-year-old daughter, Rachel. Is it just about what the coolest toilet you've ever seen in your travels and your work with the incubator has been? The background of this, when I used to travel a lot more, I used to take pictures and send them my kids videos of cool toilets I would see from around the world, because toilet technology elsewhere was so much better than here in the US. Any really interesting toilet designs that are cool?
Look, I don't want to pick winners here. I don't want to pick winners, because there's a lot of really cool stuff out there, and I encourage you all to peruse our website. Especially.
She's fascinated by the one in the Frankfurt airport where the toilet seat spins and sprays spray on the seat.
Oh yes, the shower toilets, the Japanese shower toilets. Yes. But what I can say in terms of cool factor
Mm.
is our partnership with the European Space Agency.
Okay, cool.
And I think many of our members were quite shocked when the European Space Agency came to us and um, wanted to work together on supporting businesses that could use space technologies for sanitation in emerging markets.
Hmm.
And so this is very cool because obviously, space agency, you're talking amazing access to technology,
Oh yeah.
and they had been working in the water space and really satellite technologies that could detect water pollution, and a lot of that water pollution is from sanitation, as you might know.
Sure.
And so we're very interested in also getting involved in solutions that new technologies could bring for sanitation, and combining these efforts of really using satellite technology to really understand where the pollution is happening and to trace it upstream to where the problem is, and to be able to bring new solutions and to have it be a market-based model that would be sustainable and resilient. And so some of the work that we've been doing with the European Space Agency has also been around health, because the European Space Agency and space technology in general, of course, how they monitor the health of astronauts, and how they monitor uh, potential disease in space,
Hmm. Hmm.
is very important. You don't want your astronauts getting sick.
Sure.
And so there's some really interesting technologies that they have that we're looking at how can be applied to sanitation systems in developing world contexts. And I want to say one thing about this whole smart sanitation or digital sanitation space, which is emerging and becoming really important in our current COVID
Sure.
world. And that is, the other tools that we have that we could be looking at here are smart cities.
Hmm.
When we ran our project in Pune, we partnered with Pune's smart city, because the first idea that we had was, if you can put sensors, around the city to measure pollution and to measure air quality, to measure traffic, why can't you also put them in toilets and the sewer system? Just to have basic data on
Hmm. Hmm.
usage, on um, how it's running, need for maintenance, and of course, as we've seen now, a lot of environmental data, a lot of health data, and a lot of data on the quality of the sewage to be upcycled into some of those products we talked about earlier in the sanitation economy. And in the COVID world we're in now, we could very easily link up with many smart cities that are very advanced around the world, to
Okay.
bring these technologies to link in, because they already have the analytics, they already have grids, of the
Hmm.
city, and we can. When we did it in Pune, you see where the public toilets are, you see what's circulating, you see where the treatment plants are, you see their operational capacity. So this is something that we can do now, and something that can really be critical now, and start to show the value of digitizing sanitation systems. And on that, another cool thing that I'm really excited about in doing that is, once you start to have all of this data, it's sort of not only the predetermined benefits that you kind of put the technology in place for, but it's also having the data enables more innovation. MIT Sensible Cities Lab, who we've been working with, have across their program many different sets of use cases where, if you display data openly on the status of the toilets and sanitation systems in a city, or the problems that they're having, and you invite entrepreneurs and businesses in to solve problems, it's
Hmm.
amazing what they come up with. And so this would be another sort of next step, especially in our COVID world, if we can get these technologies into smart cities now that have the infrastructure to be able to analyze that data and invite in innovators to solve problems. I think we will put ourselves forward about 5 years. So that's what's cool
That
for
is
your
cool. It's
for your
extremely
for your
cool.
13-year-old
High
daughter.
degree of coolness. I'll let her know. No, that was awesome. That was awesome. I enjoy hearing these themes of smart in terms of the city, smart home, smart healthcare technologies. It's going to be a very interesting few decades. Um, Cheryl, as we sort of get to the end of the show, we usually do a wrap-up question focusing back on you. Clearly, you've had an amazing career so far. Fortune 500 companies, startups, public, private sector. Any important influencers that you might want to highlight at this point, to give a shout out to, that have inspired you, kept you on this path, that if it wasn't for them, Cheryl Hicks would be off doing something else.
Sure. I mean, many, many, many. I mean, I mentioned sort of the early days in my career, some of the Canadian influencers, Stephen Lewis, Naomi Klein, and then the corporate influencers. But also our CEOs of our companies. I mean, Paul Pullman was CEO when we were founded of Unilever, Gilbert Ghostin of Firmenich. Kinyasito of Lixil Corporation, but also the CEOs of the smaller businesses like David Auerbach of Sanergy and Rajiv Kher of Ceraplast, who was just bought by a large multinational because of their sanitation innovation, which is very inspiring. And governments that are taking chances as well. Param Iyer, Secretary Iyer in India, who really led their Clean India program, which moved the needle of access to sanitation in India from 30% to 100% in 4 years. Very, very inspiring leaders, in this space, and also, like I said before, looking for those sector crushes, looking outside of what others are doing and how others are making it happen. And for us, it's about who is really helping to get basic services to the most vulnerable, who is leveraging new technologies and new business approaches to do it, and who are collaborating in new ways to do it. I already talked about my sector crushes in solar and smart cities, but another one is plastics. Before COVID, one of the hottest collaborations in business was around the elimination of single-use plastics. 30 companies coming together, committing $1 billion to develop those ecosystems. And that's a crush because that's what we need in sanitation and for the sanitation economy. And I think that with COVID raising the awareness the way it has for the importance of sanitation and hygiene, and how this is a crisis on sanitation and hygiene, and we're just not equipped to protect ourselves no matter what context we're living in. This is the time. And we really believe, and many in our network believe, that we're embarking on a new social contract here, where sanitation and hygiene becomes of key importance to companies, cities, and governments. And we advocate that if we don't also make sure that the solutions being deployed are business solutions, we don't get long-term sustainability and resilience, which has crippled this system in the past. And we have to learn from that now. And we need more businesses to engage, both small and large, because that's where the innovation happens. That's where the magic happens. And the Toilet Board Coalition is happy to be a platform to help channel that good work. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. I appreciate that wrap up, and it's I really appreciate you taking the time, Cheryl, to come on and talk to us about this theme. It's we don't think about it. It's sort of behind the scenes, but it's just
you will now.
That toilet's constantly now. But for everybody that's going to be watching on the IdeaXme YouTube channel or listening on the various podcast networks, we've been talking with the amazing Cheryl Hicks, Toilet Board Coalition Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director, doing amazing things to usher in the circular, sustainable, smart sanitation economy. Cheryl, thank you for taking the time to come on. Thank you for what you do. And as we say on the show, thank you. Namaste. And thank you for moving the human story forward in this theme, because it's so very important.